And you're absolutely right that it's driven by having dealt with the opposite for so long, of being something that no one seems to want, and then all of a sudden multiple people want you at the same time. And you're going to ride that train as far as it goes. And unfortunately, if you don't exercise some restraint on the way there, you end up hurting not just them, but yourself.
Welcome to Making Polyamory Work. Hi, I'm Libby Sinback, and I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm a queer polyamorous mom and an integrative relationship guide. And I am committed to helping people who live and love outside the status quo have extraordinary relationships, because relationships are at the core of our well-being as humans. I think love is why we're here and how we heal. Today's episode is part 2 of my conversation with Alyssa Gonzalez. Alyssa is the author of Non-Monogamy and Neurodiversity, a More Than Two Essentials Guide. Alyssa wrote the book for neurodivergent people who are considering and or are practicing non-monogamy, to help them understand both how well suited they are to non-monogamy and also help them manage the challenges that being neurodivergent can bring to non-monogamy. In part 1, we largely talk about the first thing, why being neurodivergent makes you especially well suited for non-monogamy, and why non-monogamy is a really good fit if you are neurodivergent. And part 2, we are going to talk about where it can be especially challenging if you're neurodivergent and you are non-monogamous. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies to help you if you are facing some of those challenges. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I do recommend you hop on over and listen to part 1 first. But now we're just going to dive into part 2 of my conversation with Alyssa Gonzalez.
We talked about RSD already. What are some of the things you've heard about that make it sound like it would be really hard? Like, because you said before we started recording that there are people who are like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if that's something I'm capable of. I don't know if I could handle it. And even citing their neurodivergence as one of the reasons why. And I guess I'm curious what you've heard from people about why that feels not possible.
One big one is that for a lot of us, especially those of us that are autistic, definitions can be a very useful foundation for how we understand our world. Like definitions and categories. A lot of us are very fond of categories. There's an idea that I wish the people who created Pokemon would confirm that their franchise is more or less designed for the way autistic minds work, because it's a whole game with not one single reflex-based challenge in it that is totally based on putting things in categories, and we're making eye contact with an NPC as an act of aggression. But point there is, when we're confronted with a world whose patterns don't make a whole lot of sense, and then people tell us, when you have a romantic partner, that means you do these things with them and you don't do these things with other people. And if you have a person where these things are true, that means they're your romantic partner. And you do these things with your friends. And so if you do these things with your friends, that makes them a friend. And you can build a whole structure of how human relationships work out of all these definitions. And sometimes you'll find edge cases and exceptions that test all of this, because humans are complicated and messy. But those definitions are useful, and non-monogamy asks us to systematically deconstruct most of them. And that can be extraordinarily frightening for someone who is using that to try to make anything about interacting in the wider world make sense.
So in a way, the rules, the compulsory monogamy and the rules and the rigidity that, this is a friend, this is a lover, this is a partner, this is a spouse, etc. This is a family member. These are the very rigid categories. That's comforting.
Yes.
And to let go of it and embrace some vagueness to certain autistic brains. I'm not going to say all of them, but like certain autistic brains can feel very destabilizing and challenging.
Very much. And And so I can imagine for a lot of people, especially people who've been confronted with a lot of loneliness and abandonment, say that trying to erode the distinction between your romantic one and only, who's the person who's going to be there, ride or die for you specifically, and who has to be your closest confidant and so on, and other people you're close to, that can feel a lot like being abandoned, I think.
Well, and you are.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that a lot of people struggle with this actually when they do let go of the rigid categories. It's a grief process because there is a thing that you thought you had that you could really lean on, you know? And then suddenly that thing that you could lean on that was a secure like pillar of how you saw the world, if that's not there, you have to feel this. There is a lot of sadness, I think, with losing it. Yeah. Even if you're not being actually abandoned, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a definite sense that you're taking something apart and don't have its replacement ready at hand. But the good news is you're in this project to build that replacement.
Yeah.
And it gets to be a custom job now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anything else that you have heard or experienced yourself that has felt like a challenge for your brain? I can tell you what mine is, but I'm going to save it.
So one I've had to deal with a lot is alexithymia.
Okay.
Which for people who don't speak science is a situation that a lot of neurodivergent people can deal with, where we have difficulty identifying our own emotions, especially if we're currently experiencing a strong one or several strong ones at once. I think a lot of different varieties of neurodivergence can confront this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it is difficult to have conversations about emotions you can't name. And it's difficult to figure out what the situation even is if you're having trouble figuring out how you feel about it, and what the reason your elevated heart rate and outsized reaction to something that just happened around you is about. And especially in a situation as likely to confront a person with new situations as entering into a non-monogamous relationship model can be. Developing some skill with identifying emotions is extremely helpful, and not being able to do that can cause a lot of unnecessary heartache.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good one. I'll throw out mine, which is time blindness. That's a big one.
That's something, all right. Yeah.
You know, you're on a date with somebody. I mean, I have a habit, and it's an important habit for me, of putting away any technology when I'm spending quality time with somebody.
Right.
But then I can lose my ability to know how much time has passed. And I think that's the thing a lot of people experience, but I think I struggle with it extra. And sometimes I also have a hard time sort of gauging how much time something will take. I'll overestimate some tasks and I'll underestimate others. And it means that my time management is not what I would like it to be because of that. And I think, when we talk about managing multiple relationships and putting different people on your calendar and managing schedules, and a lot of people looking for the consistency and the showing up as a signal that you're important, that you're being thought of, that that you're not going to get abandoned, that you're going to be prioritized, all of that. And to make sure that you're getting the time that you want with your people, like that also can be a source of anxiety for people. Being a person who's bad with time can mean those two things can really clash, right? If somebody's really looking to find security in how well I manage my time, if they're looking, they're feeling like, oh, you're important to me if I show up on time for you. That's not how it works in my brain. You're important to me if I made time for you. But if I show up on time,
write that one down.
But if I don't show up on time, that doesn't mean I don't care. It just means I fuck this shit up sometimes.
Yeah. There's a running gag in the circles I run in that Google Calendar is an extra partner in every polycule.
Oh my God. Well, this is another example of how technology is very assistive. At one point I actually got a smartwatch that would give me a little alarm 10 minutes before I needed to wrap something up so that I could wrap it up. And, you know, and sometimes it would be, oh, I'm not going to wrap this up. I'll text the person that that's waiting on me or whatever, that I'm not going to wrap it up, because at least then I'm doing the proactive communicating thing. But yeah, I would say that's a big one for me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I know something that's come up for me as well is getting a little too excited about what the idea of a new partner means. As this comes up like less in the context of being autistic or ADHD and more on the traumatized side of neurodivergence,
which they often go hand in hand.
Yeah. We have yet to meet a non-traumatized neurodivergent person, I think. But it's a whole separate topic that I just did not have the space to cover in this book. So good news, Thornapple Press has something coming out later about this. And also there's Polysecure that already came out. But there can be this idea that being able to get lots and lots of people to call you a partner is some sort of innate validation of your value as a person, regardless of your ability to follow up on what that means to them or to you.
Right.
And that can be very exciting. I definitely overextended myself a while back, which became a matter of some regret.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, though, if what you've experienced previously is a lot of rejection. Like some people can kind of overcompensate in the other direction, for sure.
Yes.
And that happened to me, but in a different way, where I found myself being included in a social group where in a way, I mean, I'd had a lot of friend groups in my adulthood, but this social group was like really intimate and really close, and just like, it just felt so magical. And then when some things about it to me felt harmful and coercive, and I had a hard time stepping away from it, because I was so excited to be there and to be included. And again, I think what so many of us crave, like, again, humans, not autistic people, not people with ADHD, but humans, is a feeling of belonging.
Yes,
and
so much.
So when we find it somewhere, whether it's through a romantic partnership or a friend group or what have you, or polycule, we can get, like you said, overly enthusiastic about it and maybe be out of alignment with our values. Yeah.
And the result can be having a schedule that becomes difficult to navigate, and not being able to provide the level of commitment that one promised, and having to reevaluate some relationships. They mostly did it for me in a complicated situation. I probably shouldn't say in a recorded medium.
Well, the getting the kid in a candy store, that I think that there are plenty of people who can identify with that, who've had that experience.
So much. And you're absolutely right that it's driven by having dealt with the opposite for so long, of being something that no one seems to want, and then all of a sudden multiple people want you at the same time. And you're going to ride that train as far as it goes. And unfortunately, if you don't exercise some restraint on the way there, you end up hurting not just them, but yourself.
Right. Well, I think that's a perfect place to transition into, okay, let's say we've convinced you, or really, I'm not trying to convince anybody, but Alyssa, I think Alyssa is trying to convince you. So let's say Alyssa's convinced you. What are some strategies that we would tell folks who know they have a different type of brain, who want to step into this world? What would we tell them that would be sort of the keys to success? Hard-won lessons that perhaps we've learned, specifically for folks who are neurodiverse.
A big one is understand the nature of your neurodivergence as thoroughly as you possibly can. Even if you don't necessarily want to name it in public, you want to know, what parts of you are connected to this, and therefore which ones you would be, hard pressed to set aside for someone who is otherwise interesting, because they're just part of how you're wired. And this also informs the challenges you might face as part of a relationship. Every form of neurodivergence, however much their attributes might overlap, comes with a different cocktail of all these ingredients. And knowing yourself is critical. It's critical for being alive in general, whatever you get up to with the gift of life. But in this endeavor, where it's specifically about pursuing relationships without the guiding heuristic of social norms, you need to know exactly what you are presenting to someone else, and to be open and upfront about who you are as much as is safe for you to be.
Well, and as much as you
Because
can.
That as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not really fun for anyone if you end up getting close to someone who isn't getting close to the actual you.
Mm-hmm.
There are all sorts of stories about people who have to hide big pieces of themselves in order to have relationships. And I remember what it felt like to be so lonely that deal seemed appealing. It sucks. In every way that you can conceivably scrounge up the option to not do that, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's better for your long-term mental health in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Further from there, this is more for the Hispanic people in the room,
Mm-hmm.
but if your partner insists that if you're not making big loud displays of jealousy every time they interact with someone of a gender they find appealing, that's their problem. If they leave you over that, they're doing you a favor.
Yeah.
Thank them for their service and send them on their way. Marie Kondo that nonsense as soon as you possibly can, because it's not worth it.
So yeah, jealousy is not a love language.
And I want every Cuban American on the planet to hear that over and over in their sleep until they get it.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, and you had said something about
I dealt with in high school.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, and you said something about a good coping mechanism for RSD, like in terms of like if you know people who struggle with, again, not just the prospect of rejection, but really any negative feedback, when like the system thrives on feedback, and some of it will be negative because we'll have to iterate, we'll have to make adjustments, we'll have to say that didn't work for us, or I didn't like that, or that was hard for me. What would you suggest that for people who know they struggle with that?
Yeah, when you're facing an RSD type Pokemon, its type weakness is patience. RSD leads to great big emotional spikes that can be very dramatic, but they do not have the endurance to last. The best thing that you can do for yourself is take a big deep breath, tell that other person you're going to take some time to process, and then make absolutely no rush decisions.
Yeah.
Every decision I have ever regretted in my entire life has been a rush decision.
Yeah, I will co-sign that. My partner here and I actually taught a workshop on how to slow down. And I think that just dovetails beautifully to what you said. When you know that you're spinning out, learn how to be nice to the parts of you that are struggling, and slow down with yourself. And then, and then again, you can go back to advocating for yourself, but from a regulated place.
Yes.
Because what's happening usually with people with RSD, and this is my lay person understanding of it, is the reason why that's a thing is because we've been experiencing so much rejection from the time we were little, like that nothing we could do was right.
Yep.
And so we would hear, and it's been shown that especially kids with ADHD, like the number of times that they've been corrected by the time they're 5 years old is like, I think 20 times what a neurotypical kid would experience. And
right.
I probably don't have that number quite right, but it's substantial. And so, you'd think that would mean that your tolerance for it would be high. But for some people, I do think their tolerance is really high to the point where they have a wall up around feedback, which is not helpful either. But like, I think for a lot of people, it makes them sensitized to it. And there's usually no care provided for all of that criticism, like it's just that you're wrong, not that there's a skill you don't have, or there's something you don't understand that you need help with. And so like you being able to kind of reparent yourself in a way and be able to say to yourself, okay, I messed this up, or my partner isn't happy with me right now, or they're misunderstanding me, or this person didn't like me. Okay, probably what's getting triggered is some very small young part of you that probably just needed love and didn't get it. And so when you can direct love towards that part, I think that can help actually unwind that reactivity. And over time, if you get really practiced at it, it starts to become something that you just naturally do.
Yeah.
And then I think it gets a lot less hard.
So much. In the interim, just putting some space between the inciting incident and the reaction to it gives you time to let that big emotional spike come and go, give you time to acknowledge what kind of reaction you're having, and gives you time to think about the criticism that you have just received and decide what you are going to do with it. And maybe the answer is telling the other person that, no, you're going to keep doing the thing because it's important. Or maybe it's, no, you're right. I'm going to take the trash out on time next time. And maybe it's, I think we can meet each other halfway in this matter. And maybe it's actually, I think this is someone else's fault entirely.
Right.
Like,
well, and nowhere in there did I hear try to perfect yourself out of it, you know, like try to just be more perfect. And I think that's an important thing to hear, is that I do think people who have RSD either can be very, like, as a strategy to protect themselves, do a lot of avoidance or do a lot of perfectionism.
Yeah.
And that's not the way out. You can't perfect yourself out of a correction. You just can't. Won't work. Okay, so then you said you had some potentially good coping strategies for alexithymia. So folks who, like, I'm imagining RSD and alexithymia might be a tough combo. Like, I feel really bad and I can't tell what I'm feeling.
In one of the big reasons I'm a writer is that being able to sit patiently with the situations in literary form has made them a lot easier to recognize and identify. So a classic strategy for working around alexithymia to build the skills that alexithymia is definitionally you not having is to read a lot and maintain a diary about what's going on in your day. And that's how you figure out that big arousal spike you had at one point in the day was actually you were just scared because there was construction noise outside at the same time that you got that email and so on. Or maybe when they give you that bad news, you were scared about what action they might take as a result of doing this. And that's why you freaked out, and not because you were angry with them or any of that. Taking time to process is important. Taking time to review all the bits and pieces that come along for this big emotional ride is important.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear in there is like becoming an observer of yourself.
Exactly.
Like being able to, because if you can't feel it internally and let that be your guide, sort of stepping outside of yourself and then looking back at yourself can help you understand what's going on.
Exactly. Sort of therapeutic dissociation.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't call it dissociation, actually. In fact, Dan Siegel calls it mindsight. Is his word for it. And yeah. And you know, it's interesting. One of my partners has I think has alexithymia. I mean, there's never been a diagnosis, but the way this person describes the operating their body is sometimes like they feel like they're a little man inside of a robot suit trying to maneuver things around. And so not always aware of what is happening, or even sort of like what things trigger him, or, you know, those kinds of things. And it's not so stark. But I, you know, he was telling me the other day, he's like, you know, I just don't really have a sense of like, you know, what I am and what I am not. And I was like, how do other people have that? And, you know, I just don't have this internal felt sense of myself.
Yeah.
And I said,
your friend needs to look up the words dissociation and depersonalization. They are going to find those paragraphs edifying.
Probably. But the thing that I said actually was that I was like, well, I don't know that anybody perfectly has an internal felt sense of themselves exclusively. Like I have some of that. But a lot of what I know about myself is actually doing what you described, which is journaling and reflecting and stepping outside of my experience and looking inward at it. And just having a witnessing mind about myself, and also then checking with other people. Like, I was thinking I was doing this. What did you see? And not taking their feedback as like the truth, but like, combining that with what I've observed about myself, with what I've, what I felt internally, like combining all of that data to kind of construct who I am.
Yeah.
And then that's how later on you can tell people about who you are, right?
Very much. And it's extra important for people that, say, constantly get instructed to put certain emotional fronts up in certain situations, regardless of how they're actually feeling, Mom.
Right. Well, and have been told that the ways that you respond naturally to things is incorrect. I mean, I remember, like, I used to really not understand why people would get so upset when someone died. Like, that was it just didn't bother me. I think there was this, and it still doesn't really bother me that much, because I sort of accept that, like, everybody dies and you never know when your life is going to end. And it would be, it's sad if there's somebody that you'd really like to continue to be in the company of isn't around to keep you company. But it's not that I don't care that someone dies, but I also just don't get, like, utterly distraught about it the way other people do. And I always just thought, like, am I just broken because that's not how I feel? And being able to, and, like, a lot of people, that's what masking is, right? Is being able to observe, oh, this is the thing that I'm expected to feel, or this is the behavior that I'm expected to project, or the reaction I'm supposed to have. And so I'm going to start doing that to be accepted, without ever trying to understand, why didn't I feel that? Why wasn't I acting that way? Why didn't I have that reaction? So then you kind of bypass understanding yourself for behaving like everyone else. So I think that witnessing mind piece is, like, super important to unraveling masking and being the authentic you.
So much. This is all extremely true.
Yeah. Well, and I'll throw out for my time blind people, haven't figured it out. The best thing that I figured out is actually what Alyssa said earlier, which is just to tell people on the front end, I suck at time. I work on it. I have to tell my clients this too. My time isn't perfect. And here's what happens if I'm late. Here's what happens if you're late. Here's what I expect of you. Here's what I will do. Here's what happens when I don't do that. And I get really good at repair because just sometimes that happens. Because I don't expect people to be, like, endlessly compassionate if I'm keeping them waiting. I respect that if we're all, time is, like, the one resource that we have, really. And
people meeting each other halfway means that not only should they exercise a reasonable amount of patience with this kind of thing, but you have to understand why they would be annoyed with it if it keeps coming up.
Yeah, I love that. That's so important, and I'm really glad you said it, because I think that, as we talk about, like, needing accommodation, needing understanding, needing compassion around any kind of difference that might show up in a relationship, it's, as people who have been told that we need to do it the way the normal people do it. We've been having to, you described it as, like, we have to climb this huge mountain to meet people where they are, and they don't have to do anything for us. Now, we're not asking that everybody come down the mountain, or I don't like down, but, to come down to where we are. I don't like the word down and up, but, like, I'm going to go with it for now. Instead, we just want to see each other and meet each other how far we want to.
Yeah.
Right? Like, nobody has to meet me. Like, if somebody really, time is really important to them, great. I probably should be in a relationship where we don't need to be on time for things.
Yes.
And I will do my best. I will do my best to meet where you are and what you expect. And I just ask the same. Exactly.
Indeed. And there are lots of other quirks a neurodivergent person can bring that are best addressed in very much the same way. A lot of us have different and sometimes incompatible expectations about what a comfortable home looks like, and they can come up whether you're spending time with someone short term or trying to make a shared home work, that you got to find some way for both people to feel like they're being honored in this matter.
Yeah.
Or else one person's just giving up a piece of themselves for the other, and maybe it's a piece of themselves they never wanted, but if it's one they can't actually get rid of, then being forced to ignore it is not going to be good for them.
Well, or just not being able to do it, right? I mean,
Mhm.
this is the thing that I often say to people is, okay, I see that you'd like your partner to do this thing and they're not doing the
Mhm.
thing, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And you've asked them to do the thing. They've
Yeah.
said they want to do the thing. So you
Mhm.
have an agreement of some kind to do the thing,
Mhm.
whatever it is. But then it's not happening. I
Yeah.
introduced this radical concept. Maybe they can't.
Mhm.
Maybe it's not
Mhm.
about not knowing to do it. Maybe it's not about not wanting to do it. And maybe it's that they can't. And then what we
Mhm.
have to do is be in a grief process about this thing that you wanted, just may
Mhm.
not be possible in this relationship. And then you get to decide, can I
Mhm.
live with that? Can I grieve that and let it go? Or do I need to be in a
Mhm.
different relationship? But what's the worst scenario is what you're describing, where the
Mhm.
person is continually trying to meet some bar that doesn't
Mhm.
work for them, that isn't compatible with their system, that
Right.
isn't possible for them. And then they're
Mhm.
perpetually feeling like not enough. And the other person's perpetually feeling disappointed. And they're
Mhm.
both making each other feel terrible. Bad
Yeah.
deal. Don't do it.
Agreed.
So like I feel like it comes back to know yourself
Mhm.
and be able to call it when you're like, look, this thing, whether it's a clean home or whether
Mhm.
it's time management or whether it's the amount of time it takes to repair a conflict, because one person needs like 3 days to calm their nervous system before they can talk rationally about something,
Mhm.
whatever it might be, you know, you
Mhm.
you need to be able to like know what you're capable of and what you're not. And
Mhm.
I promise that I really do believe there's someone and probably some ones for everybody. I really believe that.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know. I guess maybe that's where
Mhm.
I would leave it for myself, is like the more you can understand and embrace who you are, I think the more successful you'll be in general.
Mhm.
Probably not in the normative world actually, but in this world that we've carved out for ourselves over here, that's where the juice is. And honestly, I think I heard this from you, Alyssa, but I'll speak for myself, that the love that I have now in my life
Mhm.
that is on the terms of how I actually am as a human being is the best. It's
Yes.
the
So
best.
nice. That's how I ended up being this beacon of neurotic, autistic tidiness who mostly dates absolute disaster trash gremlins.
You don't have to live with them, so it works out.
Exactly. That's how we make it work.
Cool. Anything you want to say before we part, Alyssa, that you want to just offer people before we say goodbye?
You can do the non-monogamous thing. I promise you. You're better at this than you think you are, even if you're just starting. And you can figure out where your hangups and challenges are, and you can make this work. Right? There are lots of ways it cannot work with a specific person. There's plenty of toxicity to go around, and non-monogamy isn't a way to neutralize it all, but you can make this work. Like there are very few personalities that absolutely require that you loudly proclaim that someone you love isn't allowed to show their love to other people, or vice versa.
Hmm.
If love isn't about freedom, then what's it even for?
Wow.
Also, I wrote a book. Please buy my book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in
Mhm,
addition to your book, which people can
mhm.
buy wherever books are sold, I'm
Yeah,
assuming, yeah.
that is correct.
How can other people connect with you?
You can find my work in general at alyssagonzalez.com. It's going to be spelled somewhere, right?
Yeah, I'll have it in the show notes.
Okay. That is also where you can buy signed copies of this book. If I've got a whole bunch more I want to not have on my shelf anymore. Every now and then I put up discounts. My blog is the-orbit.net/Alyssa. Can I confirm I remembered that right?
And we'll link it. Yeah.
Excellent. Doesn't update very often, but I like what I put up there. And I'm on a whole bunch of different social media, but you'll find the links for that on my website.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, Alyssa, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really lovely to talk to you.
It's been an honor, a privilege, and a delight.
Yay.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any thoughts about what I've said today or a question for the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram as thatpolyam.mom, or you can go to the show's website, makingpolyamorywork.com, and submit a question there. I'll also say that if you're loving my podcasts, but you are looking for more support, I do this for a living. I am an integrative relationship guide. So I help individuals, couples, and groups have amazing relationships. You can find out more about my offerings on my website. If you love this podcast, please share it with your friends, your networks, your Facebook groups, your coworkers, your family, etc. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Also, if you listen on iTunes, I always love getting reviews. It literally makes my day. And it'll also help more people find the show. Making Polyamory Work is created by me, Libby Sinback. It is edited by Finn of the Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast and hosted on the Spotify podcasts platform. Vanda Leone manages the website and posts the transcripts. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.